Well, as all of us are all too well aware, a few weeks ago, the famous Doomsday Clock was advanced by 3 minutes towards midnight. That's a threat level that had not been reached for 30 years. The accompanying statement invoked the two major threats to survival, nuclear weapons and unchecked climate change. The call condemned world leaders who are endangering every person on Earth by failing to perform their most important duty, ensuring and preserving the health and vitality of human civilization. This grim declaration naturally brought to mind another one just 50 years ago, the appeal to the people of the world by Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein, calling on them to face a choice that is stark and dreadful and inescapable. Shall we put an end to the human race, or shall mankind renounce war? Recognizing, of course, that the war can quickly turn into terminal nuclear war. The Russell-Einstein appeal differs from the current declaration in two crucial respects. It did not include the threat of environmental catastrophe, which was then not sufficiently understood, and it addresses the people of the world, not the political leadership. And that difference is of some importance. There is substantial evidence that on climate change, nuclear weapons planning, international policies generally, the population in general seems more concerned than the political leadership. It's hardly a secret that even the most free and democratic societies, governments respond only in very limited ways to popular will. For the United States, it's well established in academic scholarship that a considerable majority of the population is literally disenfranchised at the lower end of the income wealth scale. Their opinions have no influence on policy. Influence increases slowly as one moves up the scale, and at the very top, which is actually a fraction of 1%, the policy is pretty much determined. That being the case, the attitudes at the very top of the ladder are of quite considerable significance. These are revealed dramatically in a poll of CEOs that was released a few weeks ago at the Davos conference, conference of the masters of the universe, as the business press describes them. The poll revealed that climate change did not merit inclusion among the top 19 risks that concern CEOs. Nuclear weapons were not even mentioned. We're still at the top of the perceived risks was regulation. That is the prime device for addressing environmental catastrophe. Their overriding concern was growth prospects for their companies. Well, the result's not surprising. Whatever their individual beliefs may be, in their institutional roles, the CEOs are constrained to adopt policies that are designed to pose extraordinary and undeniable threats to the continued existence of humanity, in the words of the Doomsday Clock Declaration. And given their enormous role in determining state policy, it's no less surprising that policy lags behind public opinion on the concerns that have moved the clock so close to midnight. And much the same is true of attitudes towards international affairs. Popular opinion diverges significantly from that of the decision-making classes. So a considerable majority of the public has held consistently that the United Nations, not the United States, should take the lead in international crises. Such views are so remote from elite opinion that they're barely even articulated publicly. A good part of the reason for this is the nature of elite opinion. And as is often the case, it's at the critical end of the spectrum that we find the most information, insight into these issues. So here's an example from a featured article in the current issue of the New York Review of Books, the leading intellectual journal, kind of left liberal in orientation. The article's by Jessica Matthews, till recently the head of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And what she writes is that American contributions to international security, global economic growth, freedom, and human well-being have been so self-evidently unique and have been so clearly directed to others' benefit that Americans have long believed that the U.S. amounts to a different kind of country. Where others push their national interests, the U.S. tries to advance universal principles. Comment seems superfluous, except for the fact that this is indeed what many enlightened circles believe, and the policy consequences are not obscure. It's worthwhile to take a careful look at how governments regard the principle that ensuring and preserving the health and vitality of human civilization is their most important duty. Regularly, governments have not considered security of the population to be a particularly high priority. So let's begin with the early days of the ultimate weapon. That was a time when the United States had overwhelming wealth and power, literally 50% of the world's wealth, remarkable security. There was, however, a potential threat, namely ICBMs with nuclear warheads. There is a standard scholarly review, comprehensive review of nuclear policies by George Bundy, access to high-level sources. In this review, Bundy describes, I'll quote him, the timely development of ballistic missiles during the Eisenhower administration as one of the best achievements of those 8 years. But he continues that it is well to begin with a recognition that both the United States and the Soviet Union might be in much less nuclear danger today if these missiles had never been developed. And he then adds an instructive comment. I am aware of no serious contemporary proposal, in or out of government, that ballistic missiles should somehow be banned by agreement. One of the most startling comments I've ever read. In short, there was apparently no thought of trying to prevent the sole serious threat to the United States, the threat of utter destruction. Rather, the institutional imperatives of state power prevailed, rather in the case of the CEOs, for whom the fate of the species is of such little concern that it does not even enter into the rankings of concerns. We might ask whether the development of these missiles might have been prevented. Well, actually, there appear to have been opportunities. And one suggested indication is a proposal by Stalin in 1952 offering to allow Germany to be unified with free elections, which the communists were sure to lose, on condition that it not join a hostile military alliance. It's hardly an extreme condition in the light of the history of the preceding half-century. Stalin's proposal was taken seriously by one respected political commentator, James Warburg, but apart from him, it was ignored or ridiculed. Actually, recent scholarship, interestingly, has begun to take a different view. The bitterly anti-communist Soviet scholar Adam Ulam takes the status of Stalin's proposal to be an unresolved mystery. He says, Washington wasted little effort in flatly rejecting Moscow's initiative on grounds that were embarrassingly unconvincing, leaving open the basic question: was Stalin genuinely ready to sacrifice the newly created German Democratic Republic on the altar of real democracy, with consequences for world peace and American security that could have been enormous? One of the most respected Cold War scholars, Melvin Leffler, reviewing recent research in Soviet archives, he points out that many scholars are surprised to discover that Lavrenti Beria, the sinister, brutal head of the secret police, proposed that the Kremlin offer the West a deal on the unification and neutralization of Germany, agreeing to sacrifice the East German communist regime to reduce East-West tensions and improve internal political and economic conditions in Russia, opportunities that were squandered in favor of securing German participation in NATO. Well, under the circumstances, it's not impossible that agreements might have been reached that would have protected the security of the population from the greatest threat on the horizon, namely utter destruction. But apparently the option was not even considered, and possible opportunities were dismissed with ridicule, another indication of how slight a role authentic security plays in state policy. These events from the early days of the Cold War have considerable resonance right now, as several speakers have discussed. What happened when the Cold War ended provides instructive lessons into its actual nature. One question has to do with the fate of NATO, now that the alleged threat of Russian invasion had disappeared. Mikhail Gorbachev agreed to allow a unified Germany to join NATO. Again, a rather significant concession, but with a quid pro quo, that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east. That's the phrase that was used in internal high-level discussions referring to East Germany. NATO at once expanded to East Germany. Gorbachev objected, but he was informed by the United States that there were only verbal commitments, nothing in writing. Clinton later expanded NATO to the borders of Russia. As we read a few days ago, NATO U.S. armored vehicles are a couple hundred yards from the Russian border in military exercises. As John Mearsheimer recently pointed out in Foreign Affairs, indications that Ukraine might be assimilated into the Western system, possibly even into NATO, could not fail to be threatening to any Russian leader. Last December, the Western-backed Ukrainian parliament voted 303 to 8 to rescind the policy of non-alignment, which had been adopted by the ousted president, and committed Ukraine, in their words, to deepen cooperation with NATO in order to achieve the criteria required for membership in this organization. The growing crisis concerning Ukraine is of no slight threat. Well, let's go back to the 1950s. Other developments reveal the low priority assigned to security of the population. After Stalin's death, when Khrushchev took office, he recognized that Russia could not compete militarily with the United States, and that if Russia hoped to escape its economic backwardness and the devastating effect of the war, the arms race would have to be reversed. Accordingly, he proposed sharp mutual reductions and offensive weapons. The incoming Kennedy administration considered the offer and rejected it, instead turning to rapid military expansion. The late Kenneth Waltz, one of the leading international relations scholars, wrote that the Kennedy administration undertook the largest strategic and conventional peacetime military buildup the world has yet seen, even as Khrushchev was trying to carry through a major reduction in the conventional forces and to follow a strategy of minimum deterrence. And we did so even though the balance of strategic weapons greatly favored the United States. Once again, the decision harmed national security while enhancing state power. There was, as you know, a claim of missile gap in the 1960 election. There was indeed a missile gap, greatly in the favor of the United States. When this was pointed out, National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy said that we'll continue to talk about the missile gap because it's a good shorthand for our general policy of massive rearmament. How severely all of this harmed national security was revealed very dramatically in 1962 when Khrushchev sent missiles to Cuba. That was in part a foolhardy attempt to right the balance, which is enormously in favor of the United States. And that set off what Arthur Schlesinger called the most dangerous moment in history. No need to review here what happened then, but it does merit careful thought. 10 years later, Henry Kissinger called a nuclear alert in the last days of the 1973 Israel-Arab War. Circumstances were interesting. The purpose of the nuclear alert was to warn the Russians not to interfere with his delicate diplomatic maneuvers, which were designed to secure an Israeli victory, but a limited victory, so that the U.S. would still be in control of the region unilaterally. And the maneuvers were delicate, as we learned from recently released archives. The United States and Russia had jointly imposed a ceasefire, but Kissinger secretly informed Israel that they could ignore it, hence the need for a nuclear alert to frighten the Russians away. Fortunately, they backed off again. Security of the population was, again, a matter of essentially no concern. 10 years after that, the Reagan administration came to office, launched operations to probe Russian defenses. That meant simulating air and naval attacks against the Soviet Union. These actions were undertaken at a very tense moment, and not surprisingly, it caused great alarm in Russia. That led to a major war scare in 1983. That's the last time the Doomsday Clock reached 3 minutes before midnight. And newly released Russian archives revealed that the danger was even more severe than historians had previously assumed. There's a recent U.S. intelligence study which concludes the war scare was for real. U.S. intelligence underestimated Russian concerns and underestimated the threat of a Russian preventative nuclear strike. Recently, we learned that it was even more dangerous than that. In the midst of these world-threatening developments, Russia's early warning systems, which are quite primitive as compared with ours, detected an incoming missile strike from the United States that sent the highest level alert. The officer on duty, Stanislav Petrov, decided that it was a false alarm and did not follow protocol. He did not transmit the warnings. That's the difference between life and death. Yesterday, Max Tegmark mentioned another crucial case 20 years earlier. The Russian submarine commander, Vasily Archipov blocked the launching of nuclear-tipped torpedoes. This is in the middle of the missile crisis. They could have set off, that could have set off a terminal nuclear war. He blocked it. But we should remember that Russian protocol required that 3 commanders agreed to set off the missiles. 2 of them agreed. One, Archipov, disagreed. That's why we're alive. That's one sign of how thin the thread is by which we hang over the abyss. There are chilling estimates about the failures of U.S. systems, notably Seth Fallon's recent study in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. He concludes, quite appropriately, that nuclear war is the black swan we can never see, except in that brief moment when it is killing us. We delay eliminating the risk at our own peril. Now is the time to address the threat, because now we are still alive. And the Russian systems are much more prone to accidental launch for reasons that Theodore Postel discussed yesterday. Reviewing his long career as a strategic weapons planner, General Lee Butler, who was former commander of the Strategic Command, wrote that he had been, his words, among the most avid of these keepers of the faith in nuclear weapons. But it is now his burden to declare, with all of the conviction I can muster, that in my judgment they served us extremely ill. And he then raises a pointed question. By what authority do succeeding generations of leaders in the nuclear weapon states usurp the power to dictate the odds of continued life on our planet? And most urgently, why does such breathtaking audacity persist at a moment when we should stand trembling in the face of our folly and united in our commitment to abolish its most deadly manifestations? General Butler concluded that we have so far survived the nuclear age by some combination of skill, luck, and divine intervention, and I suspect the latter in greatest proportion. These are plainly not risks that would be accepted by any sane decision maker. They are being accepted by leaders who are perfectly sane, just as the risks of environmental catastrophe are being faced with eyes open and ignored by the masters of the universe, all trapped in an institutional logic that is deeply pathological, that must be cured, and quickly, if we are not to put an end to the human race, in Russell and Einstein's words.